Good afternoon and welcome to the National Gallery. My name's Francesca. I'm the Associate Curator of 17th and 18th century paintings here at the gallery, and I'm the curator of Poussin and the Dance, which is what I'm going to be talking to you about today. I'm very pleased to have Ali Pottinger here with me, who's interpreting the talk for any audiences who require BSL, and this will be available online on YouTube with subtitles and captions afterwards as well. So thank you for coming along today. It's very nice to be back in the theatre in person and with a real audience in front of me. Poussin and the Dance is the first show ever to look at dance in the work of the French painter Nicolas Poussin. It's the first show about Poussin, monographic show about Poussin in London in about 25 years. And it's the first show we've ever had dedicated to Poussin here at the National Gallery, which is maybe a little surprising, as we have outside the Louvre the world's greatest collection of paintings by Poussin. So you could say that this project is long overdue. And one of the questions I've had since the show's opened is, well, why has it taken so long to do that? And I think the best way to sort of answer that question for you is to talk a little bit in beginning about Poussin himself. Nicolas Poussin lived between 1594 and 1665. He was born in Normandy. He spent almost his entire working life in Rome. And I think you can say, or you certainly argue, I think it's quite hard to argue back if I tell you this, that Poussin is the most important French painter until you get to Manet and the Impressionists in the 19th century. He is someone who had a profound influence not only on French art, but on European art more broadly. If we look at a slide like this, Poussin is someone whose influence can be felt pretty much from his lifetime right up to the present day. So we see that in the work of somebody like David at the time of the French Revolution. We get that with Cézanne in the 19th century, Picasso in the 20th. Almost every major artist has at some point or another had a fascination with, or an obsession with, or a competition with Poussin. So he's someone who is tremendously important. That being said, he is, I think, quite intimidating for many people. I've picked his self-portrait to show you on purpose because I think it does the work that I'm trying to do, just by how serious and severe and frankly frightening he looks in it. He's an artist who is seen as very rigorous, very erudite, but I think for those reasons very intimidating. I have colleagues here who said to me, oh, Poussin, you know, you have to know a lot before you can look at a Poussin, and they sort of make that gesture, and as if even going close to the paintings is intimidating. But I don't think that's the only way to look at Poussin. I think certainly the later part of his career, this idea of being cold and very intellectual, that might be the case. But actually, if we look at the first part of his career, say the first 15 years he spends in Rome between about 1624 and the late 1630s, I think there's a very different side of Poussin, and that's what I want to show you in talking you through the exhibition today. This is a Poussin whose paintings are wild, they are a bit naughty, they are raucous, they are filled with dance and movement and people having a good time. And to really show you that, as you'll see in the presentation, we've brought together drawings, paintings, sculptures, models, and the idea really is to show you a different side of Poussin, or Poussin in a new light. So I'm going to talk you through the exhibition sort of in the order that you'd experience it if you go and visit, which I very much hope that you will. And the first section is called Invitation to the Dance. And here we find ourselves in the first room of the exhibition. So this is what you see when you enter. This is what meets you. And it felt very important to me when curating the show that you enter and you immediately get the effect of this great big marble vase, you immediately get paintings and you immediately get drawings. Because in some ways, this first room, Invitation to the Dance, is approximating Poussin's experience when he arrived in Rome in 1624. Now, he gets to Rome in 1624 at the age of about 30. To us, that sounds quite young. Actually, in the 17th century, many people would have started training as an artist before they were even teenagers. They're very, very early teenage years, so it's quite late. It took Poussin an awful lot of effort to get to Rome. It took him 3 tries to get there. So there's one journey where he gets as far as Florence. There's a second journey where he gets as far as Lyon. You know, travel is so expensive and it's so hard and physically difficult. So he's desperate to get there. And finally, third time lucky, he gets to Rome and immediately kind of falls head over heels in love with the city. He's looking at the great collections of the Renaissance. He's looking at the architecture. He's looking at antiquities that are being dug out of the ground. You know, so literally as he stood there, it's this extraordinary artistic melting pot, and one that's very, very fruitful for him. Now, when you enter the exhibition, this is what I want everybody to look at. It's a marble urn known as the Gaeta vase. It's pretty unavoidable because it's this whopping great big antiquity stood in front of you. This has been very generously lent to us from Naples. It was, in Poussin's lifetime, one of the most celebrated antiquities. So it was an object that was famous. People knew the name, they knew the image, they knew the dancing figures you can see here dancing their way around the outside of this vase. It's known as the Gaeta vase because it was in the 17th century in the cathedral in Gaeta, which is a city near Naples in southern Italy, where it served as a baptismal font. It's quite a daunting object, I think, to think of kind of dunking a baby in, but nevertheless, we're told this is what it was used for in the 17th century. And certainly in Poussin's lifetime, that's where it was. We think that he very probably did travel to go and see it in person. That's how famous it was. But even if he didn't, it was known in drawings and engravings and reproductions. So it's a very, very famous object. And as you enter the exhibition, you also see this, which is the Bacchus and Ariadne by Poussin, which has been lent to us from the Museo del Prado in Madrid. And I hope that what you are able to see is how quickly these antiquities make themselves felt in Poussin's paintings. So if we look at the vase here and we look at this lovely follower of Bacchus, you know, throwing her head back, playing the tambourine, I think she finds her counterpart in Poussin's painting over here on the right, where we have the dancer again throwing her head back in ecstasy. If we look at this man here, dancing, tripping along with these lovely sort of pointed toes, and then we look at the left of Poussin's painting there, we find basically an analogous figure. So the invitation for you in coming to the exhibition is to look at these things together and to make the connections as Poussin himself did. Now, as I said, Poussin is not only looking at antiquity, he's gone to Rome because it is the seat of the Renaissance. It is home to sort of innumerable artistic treasures. So those of you who know the gallery well might well have looked at Bacchus and Ariadne on the left by Poussin and thought, that's kind of familiar, because you know our Bacchus and Ariadne by Titian about 100 years earlier on the right, and we know that certainly at this point Titian's someone that Poussin's very, very interested in. But to me, it's significant how Poussin approaches Titian's paintings. So if I show you this painting here, The Worship of Venus in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, that was a painting that, again, was in Rome in Poussin's lifetime. And we know that he went and made a copy of it. But he didn't just go and make a copy in oil. He took clay and he modelled all these tiny little squidgy, chubby putti out of clay. And then he goes to make his drawings and his painting after that. So right from the get-go, as soon as he arrives in Rome, Poussin is thinking very dimensionally about art. He's thinking about how to make these translations between paper and paint and marble and canvas and to move between all these different media. One of the lovely things we've been able to do in the first room of the exhibition is to reunite these two drawings, one from the Getty, one from a foundation in Switzerland, which haven't been seen together before. To me, they again really emphasize how interested Poussin is at this point with objects of classical antiquity. So these are both take the shape of a kind of antique gem, this round shape. You can see that he's using the ink to kind of create shadow and volume. He's actually leaving the dancer's body just as plain paper to give you that kind of cameo effect of relief. And probably what he's basing these drawings off is something a bit like this. So on the right here, we have a cameo of a dancing satyr. So you can see again that position, you know, one foot down, the other kind of flung backwards in the air. Very, very common way in the ancient world of depicting dance, and it's something that Poussin picks up. But we think that with the case of the cameo that he's copying in these two drawings, perhaps it was missing the hands. We see here that this bit's been lost in this particular example. But if you look, here we have a lion skin and a vase. In this one, the hands are holding flaming torches. So we think that perhaps Poussin is kind of mending or reconstructing a particular broken antique gem through the process of his drawings. I really wanted to show you this drawing as well, just because I think it's so beautiful. It also finds itself in the first room of the exhibition. To me, it again captures what Poussin's doing in this period in Rome. You have the beautiful kind of cameo effect of the ink here. Again, the white paper, the blank paper left to give you these very muscular satyrs' bodies. But it's funny, you know, they're dancing, they're drunk, they're doing these kind of amazingly sort of modern-feeling hand gestures. But at the same time, it's very informed by the classical world. It's very erudite, because actually the story of the satyrs dancing on a wineskin is taken from Virgil's Georgics. So to me, this kind of captures what Poussin is at this moment. He's someone who is learned, he is studying the ancient world, but he's also having fun with it and producing these very, very beautiful objects. Just to finish this first room of the exhibition, we get to the Empire of Flora, this incredibly beautiful painting that's been lent to us from Dresden. And I wanted to include this in the first room, sort of to give you a sense of how far Poussin travels in the first years that he's in Rome. So he arrives, as I said, in 1624. This was at one point thought to have been painted possibly as late as the 1640s, because if you cast your mind back to that first painting from the Prado and how kind of busy it was, and when you go and look at it closely, you'll see how kind of visible the brushstrokes are, how kind of tangled the composition is. To then arrive at something like this, people thought that must have taken him a much, much longer time to reach this very golden, very statuesque style of painting. I mean, to me, I know that Poussin goes to Rome and he's drawing after antique statues, he's measuring them. I look at this and I think, yeah, these look like marble sculptures. They look as if they're made of marble, and we can look at this very beautiful kind of golden light that suffuses the picture, and it feels very, very different to that earlier, much darker type of painting. We do know that it's something that was painted around 1631. We know that because a Sicilian nobleman is arrested and tried for laundering diamonds, and this ends up in one of his inventories. So Poussin has to go and testify in the trial that this guy who's laundering diamonds through the art market actually did commission this from him at this particular moment. But I hope it sort of captures in paint, you know, this incredible journey that Poussin's been on as someone who's only dreamt of getting to Rome, and now at this point he's had 6 or 7 years of looking closely at all these things from the ancient world, and he's arrived at this style of painting, which really is kind of, you know, his way of expressing those marble sculptures in paint. So the second room, or the second sort of section of the show, is called Animating the Frieze, and I'll just show you here a snap of the room if you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition yet. Having had the kind of general introduction to Poussin's time in Rome, this part of the show looks very closely at one particular marble relief, the Borghese dancers who you see here on the right. And this room really is a story of Poussin's obsession with this one object. I'll show it to you there so you can kind of get a better look at these 5 dancers. This again, was one of the most celebrated antiquities in the 17th century. It's the kind of thing that you traveled to Rome specifically to go and see. It's a relief that hung in the Villa Borghese. That's what we call it, the Borghese dancers today. Poussin went and studied this. He would have gone and he may have measured it, he might have touched it. We know that he spent a lot of time in front of this work because from the 1620s, the late 1620s onwards, we begin to see chains of dancers, just like this one, holding hands, appear in Poussin's work. So if you look here at not only the hands, but the way the heads are turning, if you look at these beautiful fluttering draperies, for all the world as if they have no weight at all, when actually it's made out of marble and it's so incredibly heavy. We can then look at something like this, drawing by Poussin from the late 1620s, and see his kind of interpretation of that relief, but this time in ink on paper. So we're in a wooded glade, we've got this group of people dancing, and they're holding hands and kind of ducking and diving and weaving amongst each other. And I think the consensus is this is one of the first objects in which we see Poussin kind of playing with this idea of a motif of dancers all holding hands together. Now, if you know our collection, this might look quite familiar to you because it is related to, though not directly a study for, our painting, the Bacchanalian Revel Before a Term, which you can see here, dated to a couple of years later. So again, we're in this kind of beautiful sunlit afternoon. To me, one of the very interesting things moving between that drawing and this painting is not only, it's a question of scale, because the drawing's like this, painting's like that, but actually, to me, it's how much Poussin begins to assimilate not only the subject of the Borghese dancers as a relief, but actually also the form as well. Because that first drawing, if I go back to it, you get a much greater sense of space and depth. That looks like a circle of dancers kind of weaving. They aren't all in one line. If I show you now the painting, to me, that has been compressed, that space in which those dancers are in. I look at this, and when I stand in front of it, my eye kind of moves from the left, through this group of people along in one line, almost as if it's one figure kind of turning, twisting, ducking, tumbling, and ending up in the bottom right-hand corner where that lady is in a little bit of, I was going to say distress. I don't know if she's in distress, but certainly her friend is coming to aid her by thwacking that satyr on the head with a marble vase to stop him doing anything that he shouldn't. So this, again, is something where I think you can really see Poussin not only exploring the motif of dance, but actually looking at how the ancients in marble captured that kind of movement, and how Poussin himself can capture this one kind of very chaotic, wild moment, but in a way that's sort of going to freeze it for eternity. Again, if you know our collection, this painting will be very familiar to you, The Adoration of the Golden Calf, from just a couple of years later, probably 1633 or 34. This is the only religious painting of Poussin's in which dance appears. And you'll notice in the foreground, this group of dancers whirling around may look quite familiar. I'll come on to that in a second. To me, what's so interesting about this picture is how different the dance feels. We're no longer in that kind of sunlit Arcadian glade. Here, we've got these very dark, lowering clouds. You've got a much more claustrophobic landscape with these kind of rocky, mountainous crags pinning you in. And I think that's because dance here isn't just people kind of drunk having fun on a sunny afternoon. Here, dance is idolatrous, because these are the Israelites. They are dancing around the golden calf, which is a false idol. And if you look very, very hard, right in the top of the picture, almost you might miss him. You see Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, about to smash the tablets on which he's received the 10 Commandments. So it's dance, but it's dance in a very different kind of sense. One of the things that has been very, very fun about the exhibition, actually, is taking the opportunity to hang this alongside the Bacchanalian Revel. Although they're both in our collection, we normally hang them on opposite sides of the room, so we don't get to make this very direct comparison, which I'll show you in the next slide. where you'll notice that the two groups of dancers are an exact mirror image of one another. So where you have the dancer here with her arm outstretched and her leg in that sort of, we'll call it a D shape, here you have that same outstretched arm, but it's curved much more like a C on this side. Again, you have that figure ducking under. You've got this man with the curved back, an absolute mirror of what's happening in the other painting. So it's one of the nice things about exhibitions drawn so much from our collection is that we get to see things in a different light and appreciate them differently. So just, again, for reference, here you get kind of three versions of Poussin's dancers, you know, whirling around very wildly in ink, arranged in that frieze-like composition in the Bacchanalian Revel on the left, and then on the right, sorry, and then on the left, dancing in the Adoration of the Golden Calf. And to me, I think that, you know, it's just so fun to be able to show them together, to show them with the marble that inspired them, to have the very generous loan of the drawing from the Royal Collection. It's really, you know, not been done before and probably won't be done again for a very, very long time. The other very exciting thing is to be able to pair the marble Borghese dancers with this amazing, amazing cast of that relief in bronze, which has been lent to us by the Wallace collection. So I'll show you the two here in slightly more detail. I've already said that the Borghese dancers is one of the most celebrated antiquities of the 17th century. It was incredibly famous. It was famous throughout Europe, as evidenced by the existence of this bronze cast on the bottom register there. We know that around 1640, Poussin's in discussions with the French Royal Collection, the kind of French art advisors to King Louis XIII, and he's saying, you really need a cast of the Borghese dancers for the French Royal Collection. This is one of the most important antiquities that exists, and if you don't have it, you'll look like amateurs. The French Royal Collection, you're going to look like amateurs. So we better make you this cast. So on Poussin's advice, a cast is made in Rome from the marble. It's then, I'd say cast, probably out of wax or plaster. It's then shipped to Paris, where it gets a bit dinged up in transit. And then in Paris, they set about making a model from it and then making a cast in bronze, which is the bronze cast, which ends up in the Wallace collection. It's incredibly exciting to have the two together because the Borghese dancers, although it's now in the Louvre, it doesn't go to the Louvre until 1807, when it enters the collections of Napoleon Bonaparte. And the bronze, which was in the French Royal Collection, leaves the French Royal Collection in 1807 when it's sold to the third Marquess of Hertford, whose collection goes on to found the Wallace collection. So very, very unclear whether they've ever been in the same place before. They should have been in history, but it's always really nice when we get to reunite these objects that have clearly such a linked history. And again, you know, the bronze, you know, it's very different. It's got all the feet intact. It's kind of been repaired, imaginatively repaired, if you will, by the French artists who cast it. But again, it just stands as a testament to how important this marble was for Poussin and how it can really be, its presence can really be felt in his work and beyond. The third section of the show is more of a case study, if you will, and it's titled Dances for Richelieu. And the invitation is that, having been in this very yellow room surrounded with all the chains of dancers from the Borghese dancers, you're drawn in to look at not only another enormous antiquity, but the suite of paintings that were inspired by it. So here we have a triple portrait of of Cardinal Richelieu by Philippe de Champagne and his studio. Cardinal Richelieu was the second most powerful man in France. He was the Premier Ministre. He was the highest ranking cardinal, so he's someone with huge political and religious power. He's second really only to the king. And he gets word, basically, in the 1630s that there's this very talented French painter working in Rome. Cardinal Richelieu, at this point, is engaged very much in building France up to be a kind of second Rome. They want Paris to be the modern Rome, you know, to have the kind of art and architecture and collections and culture that would rival the great seat of the Renaissance and the classical world. So Richelieu goes about commissioning a series of paintings from Poussin for his very modest little country chateau, which you can see here. It no longer survives. It was taken down in the 19th century, but I think this engraving will give you a sense of quite how well, how magnifique, as the title suggests, quite how magnificent it was. And so in Rome, Poussin starts working in 1635 on a series of triumphs for a room in this chateau. Again, the Triumph of Pan, if you know our collection, may well be familiar to you. It's probably one of our most popular paintings by Poussin here at the National Gallery. Very, very exciting to be able to do the exhibition and to reunite it with its pendant, the Triumph of Bacchus, which normally lives in Kansas City, so a very, very long way away. We very, very rarely get to see these two paintings together, and it's incredibly fun when we do. So these are both scenes of triumph. On the left, you have the Triumph of Pan, who is the ancient god of woods and wildness and shepherds. On the right, you have the Triumph of Bacchus, who's the god of wine. On the left, you can see basically a load of people getting drunk and having an orgy in the woods. On the right, it's a more processional feeling, you know, Bacchus being drawn along in his chariot. But again, both paintings are littered with musical instruments. They're littered with people who seem to have lost some of their clothing along the way. They are clearly people who are very drunk and been having a good time. We can see that with the you know, empty sort of wine vessels here in the foreground, or you've got somebody raising a vine with grapes there in the Triumph of Bacchus. And the question that we always get asked if we give a talk on the Triumph of Pan here at the gallery is, well, why would a politician and a cardinal so high up in the church want a painting full of naked people on their wall? To which I suppose there's the easy answer, which is people always like to have paintings of naked people on their walls. But I think there's also the particular appeal of Poussin is that he manages to combine this wildness and revelry and naughtiness with, you know, a real erudition and understanding of the classical world. So both of these pictures are absolutely littered with references to antiquity. And for me, I think it's that kind of you know, intellectual approach that makes the subject matter of these quite so palatable for somebody like Cardinal Richelieu. So you've already had a glimpse through the doorway of this absolutely monumental vase. This is known as the Borghese vase. It's been lent to us by the Louvre. In my defense, for my colleagues who had to install it, it looks a lot smaller at the Louvre, where it's in a very, very grand room. It was a bit of a shock for us when we fully recognized how incredibly monumental it was. But it is amazing for us to have it here, precisely because of the connections between this object and the paintings. So if you look on the right, this is a detail from the Triumph of Pan, and you can see this drunken figure here, this satyr who's had too much to drink and has stumbled and fallen over, almost certainly inspired by this stumbling group on the Borghese vase. Again, an object that was in the Villa Borghese in Rome. All three of the antiquities that I've shown you so far actually are antiquities that we know Poussin studied because his 17th century biographers name-check them individually as being works that were so important to him amongst the many, many treasures of Rome. So we can see that here, looking at the Triumph of Bacchus and this beautiful nude figure here with her kind of sinuously curved back and this beautiful drapery. She's seen to absolutely derive from this figure from the other side of the Borghese vase. So it's the first time that we've ever, or anyone has ever paired antiquities with the paintings that were inspired by them, you know, in Poussin's work, and it's very, very exciting to have these things all together and to make these connections. Just before I finish on the triumphs for Richelieu, this is the third triumph in the series. We've always known that the triumphs of Pan and Bacchus occupied one side of the room in the chateau of Richelieu. And we've always known that a Triumph of Silenus occupied a space on the wall opposite. So they're not a trio to be seen together, but they were all in the same space. And we always knew that this was that composition, because when the 3 Poussins are removed from the chateau around the time of, or it's before the French Revolution actually, it's earlier in the 18th century, copies are put in, and it's definitely this composition of the Triumph of Silenus which is replaced in the 18th century copy. This painting was the first Poussin to enter the National Gallery's collection. It's part of our founding gift in 1824. It had 100 years of being considered a completely correct Poussin, and then it's had 100 years, more or less, of everybody who works on Poussin doubting it and thinking it's not right. And it's very exciting to be able to show it in the exhibition, because my colleagues have spent the last few years cleaning the painting and doing scientific investigations. So not only are we all convinced that it is absolutely the original Poussin, because we can now see it, because it was under these incredibly murky layers of yellow varnish that were completely distorting everything, everything that you could see on the canvas now. But we are also able to say that the particular mixtures of pigments are so idiosyncratic in this, and yet appear in exactly the same mixtures in the Triumph of Pan. And my scientific colleagues are basically saying, how could you possibly explain that if they weren't being made in the same place at the same time? What's more, our colleagues in Kansas City have done an analysis of the canvas and worked out that all 3 paintings are painted on canvas cut from the same bolt of cloth, which is pretty compelling evidence to say that we do now have the 3 triumphs reunited, and that's the first time that's happened with the full attribution restored to this picture, so that's particularly exciting. One of the things that felt very important in the show was to slightly bring Poussin back. I think, number one, I think many people don't know that much about Poussin. And if they do, as I said, he's seen as this intellect and very intimidating and very cold, and not somebody who's actually at work getting his hands dirty. So throughout the show, as you can see here, it felt very important to kind of pepper parts of Poussin's way of working, to kind of rehabilitate him as someone, as an artist who did get his hands dirty. So one of the things we know about Poussin is that he used wax figurines in the studio. So it's not something that's unique to Poussin. Artists would kind of make these models to work from. What's unique to Poussin seems to be the extent to which he works with these figurines. So we can look at some of his drawings, like these 2 lovely sheets from the Royal Collection, absolutely tiny, exquisite drawings. And you can really get a sense, I think, for these kind of jointed wax figurines. He would make them around a wire armature so that he could kind of pose the arms, a bit like the kind of artist models that we see today, you know, the wooden ones with joints and things. And to me, if I look up here, you know, at that arm in particular, look at the joint there, or look at the faces, these very kind of ovoid heads. There's no extraneous detail. They're just kind of tools that are allowing him to find the poses in his compositions, find the kind of fall of light and shadow, and think about how to create volume, how to arrest movement and you know, not dance here because these are for a much more violent scene, but how to capture moving bodies in ink and on canvas. So one of the things that we've done is we've worked with 2 artists, Andrew Lacey and Sean Lewis, to recreate some of these figurines. None of Poussin's originals survive. They would have been, you know, worthless in the 17th century. They were just a tool. But we have descriptions that say they're about the height of a hand, they're made from beeswax. He can heat the wax up again to kind of remodel and repose them. So for me, to have the drawings next to the kind of dimensional models that are inspired by them now, but originally might have inspired the drawings is a really fun thing. It's something we've done again later, looking again at the Triumph of Pan. This is a very knotty and difficult composition, I think, for people to get their heads around. It's also the composition of Poussin's for which the most drawings survive. So we've brought together all the surviving borrowable drawings, and you can see that these range from, down here at the left, a drawing in which he's looking very closely at one particular group of figures from the painting. Here you've got him working out, sort of the lie of the composition, and then obviously he gets fed up and turns the paper upside down and draws the whole thing again. Here we've got something that's much, much more polished and finished, probably for a collector. This is sort of fantastically scribbly, kind of trying to work out how to kind of get this subject matter down. And so we've, again, had Andrew and Sian recreate these lovely figurines to give you a sense of how he's working, because actually, that group with the goat felt really important with this study here at the bottom left. But if you go and look closely at all the other drawings, you can kind of see them moving across the composition. You can see them flip. You can see him move them around. So I think this probably is one of the instances where he's working with these figurines as a way of kind of choreographing what he's going to paint. And then finally, to bring you to the final section of the exhibition, this section of the show is titled A Dance to the Music of Time. For those of you who know Poussin's most famous dance picture at the Wallace Collection, you'll know why. This painting is known as The Dance to the Music of Time. It's Poussin's most famous painting of dance, an incredibly iconic image, and a very iconic title as well. So it felt really important, given the extreme generosity of the Wallace in lending us this picture, because it's only the second time they've ever lent a painting. It felt very important to dedicate the end of the show to this, this masterpiece, and to give people a chance to sort of spend time with it. So again, we go back to that motif of dancers, right? Holding hands, linked hands together in a chain, except that here the chain has become a circle, and this is a circle that's sort of going to whirl around. I think the implication is forever and forever. It's an allegorical painting, so the figures have been seen to symbolize the different stages of human life. So in the background here, in the dark green, you have the figure of poverty rather. And poverty leads us round to labor. That's who we see here on the right with this kind of rather pained expression, not very fancy clothes. If you work, though, the picture seems to tell us, labor is going to lead you to wealth, because then here in the foreground we've got this very elegant lady, again looking like a classical sculpture, pearls in her hair and in her arms, this beautiful shot silk clothing. But it's dangerous because too much wealth will lead you around to pleasure. So here we have pleasure with this incredible kind of come hither look on her face and her crown of flowers and this very, very beautiful flowing robes. And the implication is that if you squander your wealth, if you live a life that's too filled with pleasure, you're going to whirl around and end up back at poverty again. So this is the human condition. This is the cycle that we all live through. And it's the dance that kind of just keeps on turning. The symbolism of time is made very, very explicit in the foreground of the picture. You've got Father Time on the right playing his lyre. You've got these two little putti down either side, one with an hourglass, the other blowing bubbles, both of which are meant to remind us, of how brief life is and how quickly time is passing. Overhead, you've got Apollo riding his chariot, and he's followed by the dancing hours. So again, there's this sense of time passing. And what's been really exciting is to be able to display the painting alongside the drawing, the only surviving study for this work, which has been lent to us from Edinburgh. If you go to the exhibition, I'd encourage you to look at the two together because they're quite different. I think, even if you just look at the dancers here, they are much livelier than in the final painting. You might also notice that they're not as fully clothed. They're kind of nude or very scantily clad. And one of the exciting things about borrowing the painting is that we've been able to do all kinds of technical imaging, and we found actually that in infrared and infrared and XRF, we can see that Poussin originally had the figures much more lightly draped as they are here, or even nude, and that clothing is something that he puts on over the course of the painting process. So it's a bit like if you think of his little wax figurines, it's almost like he's kind of getting them dressed, but here he's getting them dressed in paint on canvas. It felt very important to end the show with this painting and with these dancers in particular, because to me, I think they signal a shift for Poussin. Really, from the sort of mid to late 1630s, he leaves dance behind it seems this is a subject that doesn't interest him anymore. So all these bacchanalian revels, all the drunkenness, all the dancing, all the people kind of whirling around, that really leaves his work. And, you know, from the late 1630s onwards, he's a painter who concentrates far more on religious subjects. He starts in the 1640s painting these very beautiful but very kind of austere classical landscapes, quite often you know, filled with death. You know, you could go upstairs and see a landscape with a man bitten by a snake. You know, they're kind of quite ominous landscapes. So it's a very, very different feel. So while this is the dance that goes on forever, this kind of dance circling around, actually for Poussin, it's not long after this that the dance ends, and he moves on to a very, very different kind of painting. Perhaps the Poussin that people are more familiar with, but that was really the point of the show, to give you this Poussin first, to encourage you to look at him in a new light, to see a light-heartedness in Poussin that I think perhaps we didn't all acknowledge was there before. If you'd like to go and look at some of our other Poussin, you're very welcome to go up to room 29, which is where we hang our French 17th century paintings. You'll see earlier Poussin, later Poussin, kind of go and see that journey. And you have the chance to see the exhibition here in London until the 2nd of January. But I'll stop now. Thank you very, very much for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you here.